Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Season 2 of the WOOX Masterclass series. I'm your host, DocXBT, and today we're introducing another brand new, highly anticipated feature, and that's isolated margin. Now, as many of you already know, perp trading is a vehicle that allows traders access to more funds by putting up collateral, better known in our world as margin. You're essentially borrowing funds from WOOX by using your assets as margin. The margin mode that you use determines exactly how those funds are allocated towards your positions. Basically, in isolated margin, investors get to control how much of their funds to allocate as collateral for a specific position, with the rest of the account balances not being affected by this trade, hence the name isolated. Cross-margin uses all available funds in the account as collateral for the trades. So basically, if one position moves against you, but another position is in profit, the profit can be used to cover the loss of the underwater position, allowing you to keep that position open longer. In a nutshell, isolated margin allows greater fine-tuning control over your positions without resorting to opening sub-accounts. For a while now, cross-margin has been the default margin mode on WOOX, but lately traders have been asking about isolated margin, and WOOX has provided the goods. So if this was holding you back from using Woo, now's the time to get on the team. Now let's move on and discuss some of the pros and cons of using isolated margin versus cross margin. Let's start with the pros of isolated margin. As I briefly mentioned, isolated mode allows you better control of positional risk. You get to set a fixed amount of margin to cover that position and limit liquidation amount, essentially defining a max loss should the position go against you. Now for some cons. Should you want to keep an underwater position open longer, you need to make these adjustments manually and add more margin to your position. So it's a bit more rigid and less flexible when it comes to individual positions, requiring more attention on your part. Okay, so what about cross margin? Well, the benefits of using cross margin are simple. You get flexibility in using any available balance you have to cover your positions, so you can hold these positions longer with a higher liquidation limit. So what are the risks of cross margin? Well, you run the risk of total account liquidation in some rare scenarios where one position may be in extreme drawdown that continually pulls margin from other assets to cover that one underwater position, which in some scenarios can drain the entire account. You might over-leverage and have less control of each individual position as you can't define a max margin for each position. So now, what do I prefer? Well, I'm kind of happy that we're including isolated margin, as I feel this is a very comfortable, fine-tuned control margin mode for me. I like to have a max liquidation risk on each individual position, even though it requires a little bit more attention to detail on my part. That's just me. Let me know in the comments which one you guys prefer. All right, friends, now that we're comfortable with the definitions and risk profile of the two margin maintenance modes, how do we actually go about swapping between these two options on the WOOX platform? Well, it's easy. If you're at your trading terminal, on the top right, you will see an option to switch between these modes, right? Cross and isolated. If we want to quickly swap to isolated, we select it, confirm, and now the next trade that we opened here on Bitcoin will be in isolated margin mode. Now, to note, this does not swap your margin maintenance mode by default across your entire account. It's only swapping it here on the Bitcoin perp. So you'll notice this, if I quickly swap over to Solana, it again defaults to cross margin maintenance mode. If you'd like to switch to isolated margin mode by default across your entire account, you can do so in your account settings by selecting margin and futures and selecting isolated margin mode, change, and now by default, your entire account will be on isolated margin mode. There's no need to do this on a per ticker basis. Let's demonstrate that by going now back to our trading terminal. We'll see here on Bitcoin, we are in isolated margin mode. We go over to Solana, once again on isolated margin mode. Now let's demonstrate the differences in liquidation price if we're swapping between these two modes. Let's start with cross margin, as that might be what you guys are more familiar with. If I went along Solana at 10x leverage here, pretty much at the bid and ask, we'll just do it at market. We'll do it at 139. We have access to 43,000 Solana, right? We can long up to 43,000 Solana as it's using all of the USDT balance in my account, as well as some of the unrealized P&L on the open positions, right? So if I type in, 25,000 Solana, you guys will see that my liquidation price is all the way down at 85, as even if this position goes 10% underwater, it'll start drawing collateral from the USDT in my account, plus some of the unrealized gains from the open positions that I have. Going over to isolated margin mode, if I try to do the same thing and long here at the market at 139, you'll see that I do not even have access to 25,000 Sol. I only have access to 12,000. Right? As 10x leverage will only allow me to eat 10% drawdown, right? So it's not going to be sucking USDT from the rest of my account balance. Is not going to be able to use it from the open positions. It's simply going to use what I'm limited to using here on the leverage multiplier. And now you'll see the liquidation price is all the way up at 133. Like I mentioned earlier in the video, this is a very fine-tuned way to limit downside exposure. If this trade should go against me, I'm limited to X amount of loss that I have fixed when I entered the position. I'm not able to draw collateral from other positions and other assets in my account to improve the risk profile of my trade by basically giving more and more assets as collateral. It's a very defined risk. So I previously mentioned that isolated margin gives you finer control of your positions. It's time to demonstrate that. So I'm going to enter a long here on Solana at the market. Let's say I want to long 1,000 Solana. Once I do so, you'll be able to easily find your position here at the bottom of your terminal. Let's say we want to adjust our leverage multiplier. We can do so simply by clicking on the leverage multiplier and the pencil icon next to it. This will open up a slider. So let's say we want to decrease our leverage on this Solana position. Doing so, you'll be notified that you're required to increase your margin balance. Now this will be notified here in yellow that we're going up from 15,000 to 31,000. We click confirm and you'll notice the margin requirement changes here on the right side. We can also change our margin manually by also clicking on the pencil icon next to the margin requirement, either adding or subtracting, or adding or reducing margin to our position. So let's say we want to add a little bit of margin to our position. We can do so, click confirm, and you will see these marginal changes added instantly to your position. So with all that said, I feel like this was a very good brief definition of the differences between isolated margin and cross margin. I hope to see you guys soon in episode 3 of Masterclass. Hope you guys have fun out there. Good luck, and we'll talk soon.